Welcome everyone to our third webinar in our series, Being David Part 3. As you know, this is a conversation amongst the different fellows, Kamal Bajaj Fellows and our GP Birla Fellows and our Ananta Fellows and even our Emerging Leaders Fellows from the Ananta Center. And it's about how we as a fellowship, as individuals in our leadership position are dealing with the coronavirus and its impact in our families, in our societies, and the challenges that we have. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to remind everyone this is an Aspen conversation. And as an Aspen conversation, it's meant to get to the heart of the challenges that we face, the questions that we have to answer. And because of that, it comes with the cone of confidentiality that we've all experienced sitting at the table, that everything said here is really just for us who are attending and listening. It's not meant for attribution outside to anyone. You're, of course, welcome to take whatever you learn and share it, but specific things should not be attributed. So let me get started. I'm really excited about today's panelists. I've been looking forward to getting all three of these folks together. So first we have Neha. Neha founded and ran the India Art Fair for over a decade. Then after she left that, she's moved into mental health and is focusing on a couple of things that she'll talk about. One is Inner Hour, which is a digital mental health platform. And the other is a consulting venture called Libram that she's launched with Dr. Bikram Patel and Dr. Shekhar Saxena, scientists and policy experts, very well renowned. It's been launched out in the UK. She's an Aspen Fellow, an Eisenhower Fellow, and part of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders. And we also have Ajit. Ajit is the managing director of Snow Leopard. If you ever get up to Rishikesh and Shivpuri, please go visit his wonderful camp. It's won a National Tourism Award. He's the first Indian to have completed the Polar Trilogy, which means skiing to the North Pole, the South Pole, and Greenland. I'm already feeling cold just thinking about those. He's already successfully climbed 6 of the 7 summits, the tallest peaks in each of the continents. And one of the stories we'll hear today, he and his daughter are the first parent-daughter duo to have ever climbed Mount Everest. So that's pretty exciting. He's also a Padma Shri awardee by the President of India for his achievements in adventure sports. Amrita Tripathi. Amrita is part of the GP Birla Fellowship class. She's an award-winning journalist and a television presenter. She's the founder and editor of the Health Collective, which is an online repository of conversations on mental health, and we'll hear a lot more about that today. She also is a curator of the Gender Rights Space and is a published author and a social media advisor. And her 2 novels, Broken News and CBS Not, are out there, and she's now working on her 3rd novel. I just got the first one, Broken News, so I'm just starting to go through it myself. So welcome all of you. I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you very much. And as we had talked, our approach here is going to be to hear about your experience with the coronavirus as it happened. So what I thought we would do is open up with 8-10 minutes from each of you. And Neha, maybe we'll start with you. And the questions I have are the same. Where were you and what did you first think about when you first heard about this virus? And then how did you react as the virus kind of washed onto our shores? It started to affect our societies, our communities, our families. And then where are you today, now that it's been a month or more? And as we look ahead, this story is not over yet. There's still a journey we have to go through. How are you and where are you today? And how have you been in that journey? Neha?
Yeah, thank you, James. So it's great to be here. It feels very wonderful and connected. So thank you for the opportunity. I think I was, when it all started, or just before it all started, I was having the best time of my life up in the mountains at Sitla Estate, looking at the snow-capped peaks. We had snow, rain, and sunshine all in one trip. And I remember celebrating my 40th up there with my first ever Zoom birthday party, thanks to the Aspen class. And at that stage, James was cheerfully holding up a bottle of Corona, and we all made light of it. So that's sort of where I was when it started. And there was a feeling of holding on and not really wanting to leave that and come back. And at the same time, this sort of nagging realization, you know what's waiting for you when you kind of make that trip back to town. We delayed our trip back a couple of days and were trying to stay on longer, and then came back just the day before the borders sealed and the whole lockdown came into effect. And sort of threw myself back at it full force. I spent the first few days really just rallying the neighborhood, sorting out the house. I realized at that point a few layers of responsibility that existed. Sorted out stuff at my house. Started off. I'm a single mom, but my daughter's dad lives across the road, so looked at that. My brother is in a rehab in Noida at the moment for mental health treatment. So I started sort of providing and making sure the rehab had all the supplies that they needed, and so on. So that was sort of the first couple of days for me. And then just sort of threw myself at work. It was the busiest few weeks because we sort of rose to the occasion. And I suppose this is also what people in our position do. When in crisis, you tend to just, at least for me, forget about my own end and really just say, I'm on this mental health journey, and we have a digital platform, and what can we do? And so we basically decided to double up, work 16-hour days for 2 weeks straight. We made every aspect of our digital platform pro bono. We started publicizing that, reaching out to hospitals, reaching out to friends across networks to say, please take these services. And we saw just such a big traction. Everything was growing on the app, and there was just more work for this team that was now sort of getting used to work from home. Reached out to friends who all helped and collaborated in one way or another. Several of them part of the Aspen family, and it was the strangest feeling because as I shared with friends around, and everybody was talking about the problems and challenges in the startup world, here we were with a business that was a bleeding startup till a few days ago that suddenly had interest from funders. We, in the middle of a lockdown, signed our first term sheet. We had a lot of inbound interest. People suddenly wanted to fund us with grant money because everybody said, immediately mental health is sort of center stage. And unfortunately, we kind of put ourselves in a position where we said, okay, if this is a crisis, then this is also the time to build on our offering. And so sort of really went for it. So this was a period of intense work over the last few weeks. I have wonderful friends in my Aspen class who supported in a big way. Spent a lot of time with Umang, collaborating on this as an Aspen project and seeing through this mental health dream over the last few months. So he was supporting it with Daily Hunt, and Saurabh supported it with his architectural firm, and Pankaj, and so many others who I'm so grateful for. And so all of that was what sort of basically took night and day, and it felt very full of purpose. But then came the first weekend that I gave myself just last Sunday, and decided to gift myself with a movie, and watched Contagion, stupidly, of course, and went into a complete fearful, near breakdown kind of feeling. I remember putting it on my class group. I remember one of the friends WhatsApping, video calling immediately. And we just stared at each other, just quietly, just stared. There was almost sort of nothing to say. So there was fear, there was sadness, and there was a lot of grief. I feel like we just, when you don't know what to say and you're completely overwhelmed, and I was just, the first time I felt it on me. I was anxious, and I let, I sort of not just own that feeling, but I let it kind of take over. And it was hard because there is a lot of work out there to be done, and a lot of people whose mental health we're trying to support. And I realized that I was back in a very familiar territory. And what I mean by that is that I feel like the storms of trauma have come into my life in almost a cyclic way, and sometimes some have come before the earlier one ended. When I was 5, my mother started showing symptoms of schizophrenia. She went undiagnosed for 25 years. I couldn't find her for 10 years in that period. When that ended, my brother started showing signs. My mother's fully rehabilitated today, but it sort of just seems to be a cycle of trauma. And so when this came, I was almost sort of ironically smiling to myself, saying, well, here we go again. But I think what I didn't quite sign up for was what this new normal might look like and when it might actually set in. It just this feeling of endlessly being at it and not knowing, what that answer would be and when it would be, is something that to me is very daunting. I can hide in other people's problems, and focus on work and motivate the team and do all of that. But personally, just the not knowing, and not having that control and the powerlessness that brings, I think is quite humbling. So I've sort of looked at that, across different areas in my life, looked at what that means in my day-to-day life with my daughter. I spent the first week trying to organize her and create lots of parenting groups and do lots of digital activities for her. And then, post-contagion, I just sort of was like, destiny, let's see what happens. So there was a bit of that. But that's sort of been for the most part, my journey. And I do feel that, in this mode of feeling like surrendering, it's sort of this weird balance between trying to surrender to what's going on and at the same time trying to control it. And at least trying to control something, control a day, control some actions, control some outcomes. Just my mind is just constantly going to what can I measure as an outcome of a day. And it's hard. It's hard to kind of put any metrics around that. So that's really where I've been over the last few weeks. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Neha, for sharing. I have lots of questions which we'll get into. Sorry, and speaking of questions, as all of you who are watching and listening, you do have a Q&A button on your screen. Please use that to submit questions. I'll consolidate the questions and ask the panelists as we go. Ajit, let's talk about your story. I know you have some slides and videos, same sets of questions. What part of your life, how did you approach this storm that's washing over us?
Well, I'm going to take you all on an expedition to climb Mount Everest with me. So I'm going to share a story today. Just let your imagination go. It's a sunny day in the Himalaya. You're climbing close to 8,000 meters, which is the so-called death zone on Mount Everest. The death zone because there's very little oxygen there, and we human beings aren't supposed to be there. It's a relatively minus 20 degrees Celsius. You're climbing with your daughter. It's difficult terrain, a mixture of rock and ice, and you've trained hard. And while it's tedious and you're going very slow, you have to stop after every 2 or 3 steps to catch your breath. You're feeling strong and you're actually enjoying the climb. But then suddenly, with very little warning, all hell breaks loose and there's a storm. The wind speeds pick up to 50 kilometers per hour, gusting to 70, 80 kilometers per hour, and the temperature drops to minus 50 degrees Celsius. Suddenly, it becomes a battle for survival. You can't turn back or give up. You're worried about your daughter, your team. And I promised my wife, you don't need to worry, I'll look after my daughter with my life. But a storm on Mount Everest is a different ballgame altogether. There's a huge amount of mental anxiety, and one mistake there can have fatal consequences. So what do? You take a deep breath. You can't panic. You've trained hard, and somewhere deep down you know that this training will stand you in good stead. A lot of battles are fought in the human mind, and we win or lose depending on our mental attitude. You've got to stay positive, and I encourage Dia, and in turn I draw strength from her climbing slowly and steadily but strongly through the storm. Small gestures like fist bumps or even a quick hug when the storm loses a little bit of its intensity. It's all about resilience here. I tell her to keep an eye on the team just to distract her a little bit. And I think one of the things that really helps in a storm is positive visualization. Imagine you are in camp, in your tent, drinking a hot brew, or better still, standing on the summit with your daughter and your team and unfurling the Indian tricolor. So we get to the camp. This photo you see on the screen is the camp. It's completely buried. So we dig our tents out, we re-pitch our tents, we get in, and the storm starts again. Now we get really worried because either the tent is going to disintegrate or you're going to get blown off the face of Mount Everest, about 8,000 feet, all the way down to the glacier below. But luckily, the weather gods are kind, and in the morning, the storm abates. We haven't slept that night. We force ourselves to eat, and then we start climbing again. We get to the summit camp, and we spend a few hours, 3 hours of rest, and we start climbing again at night. Can we have the next slide, please, James? Well, this is the second step on Mount Everest. It's about a 200-foot vertical pinnacle of rock, and below on the left side, you can see a frozen body. And there is no chance of rescue here. If something goes wrong, you're pretty much on your own. Well, and then we get to the summit at first light. It's straight out of a Bollywood movie. You know, unfurling the Indian tricolor is a euphoric moment. And facing immense adversity and coming out victorious is a huge high. I think the one thing I want to say to all of you is that do remember, all of us are going through a storm in our lives right now, the like of which we've never seen. But no storm lasts forever, and this too shall pass, and all of us will have adventures still to come in our lives.
Wow. Thank you, Ajit. We have a lot of questions that I'm going to get into with how this unfurled for you afterwards as well. But I'd like to hear from Amrita. Amrita, how has your experience been as this virus has washed over India?
Thanks, James. And what amazing journeys. Thanks, Ajit and Neha as well. That's just, that's pretty epic, actually. So I think for me, I was tracking the news around COVID-19 pretty much from Feb on, but it didn't really impact my life, so to say. In March, actually, I'd gone to our family home in Odisha with my mom and my brother, and it was kind of like this emotional family trip, remembrance, for my dad who passed away a few years ago. So when I came back to Delhi, I was already feeling a little bit raw, to be honest. And I had a suggestion from my day job because of the travel and sort of abundance of caution to work from home as an option, for a couple of weeks. So I was like, that's awesome. I don't want to be dealing with pesky questions in office anyway. This is great. And the novelty wore off pretty quickly, I can tell you, because once the Janta curfew was announced, and then you realize that you're actually no longer doing this optionally, like, there's no modicum of control, as we heard a little bit earlier, like you have to do this, you kind of have to just sort of lump this in, we're all kind of in the same boat. It started getting a little bit suffocating for me. And I started feeling a couple of things. I mean, one was I was on this complete like emotional roller coaster. So, I was just crying every couple of days, just not able to understand what's going on. Why am I feeling this way? And what didn't help was that, I was kind of beating myself up like mentally as well, because I'm so privileged. And I'm like, what are you even, why are you so stressed? Why are you so anxious? Look at what actually people have to deal with. So I sat with these feelings for a while, and I found it, quite troubling. And it's again, a little bit ironic because, there is a website I run that you mentioned, the Health Collective, where we talk about mental health. And the whole point is to have conversations and, try and remove the stigma around some of what we go through. That was the furthest thing from my mind. I was just dealing with my day-to-day job and then just looking at the weekends, like lying out on the couch and just, getting very emo. And then my brother, who's in another, country, another continent, pinged just to be like, so are you sharing posts on how people are coping with anxiety during, this new normal? And I was just like, no, I'm dealing with my own shit and thanks for checking in. No, thank you. I don't want to get into that. But it was actually super helpful to get that message because, I did take a minute and I was like, that's right. That's what the site is for. Let me look at my toolkit. I mean, the way I understand what I'm going through. And I started looking online. I think it's amazing nowadays. And, Neha spoke about the work that her team is doing. It's amazing how you can be sitting in your house in Delhi and actually access, a treasure trove of information tailored to you, in many ways. And there was actually a professor of, who had a course on psychology I'd done a while ago, an intro to psych course. He's based in Toronto, and he put up this really short course on dealing with anxiety during COVID. And I was like, how perfect is this? Like I just went through that course and I was like sitting and taking notes again, and it really, really helped. So I'd be happy to share some of the tips that he has in the course. And, just going back to my original skill set as a journalist, I'm like, okay, look, this is the story you're supposed to be telling, So I did an interview with him, followed up on the site. And actually also we went live on a couple of social media platforms because I was just like sending out a couple of messages being like, how are you guys feeling? Does anyone want to chat? And a lot of people wanted to chat, And so we had a few unscripted conversations and it felt so good because I think partly just saying, I'm feeling too many feelings or I'm feeling overwhelmed. How are you feeling? And just checking in on each other in that way helped me. It helped some of the people who dialed in, because of course I made sure to get a psychologist or a therapist to join us, for some of the questions that were coming up. And it was really, I think, revelatory for me. It was also something that tied back to what, Professor Jordan said in his course, when he was talking about what we're going through. He said, if you're not feeling anxious right now, you're not paying attention to what's going on. So it really sort of normalized that, I don't love the word normalize, but it really made me feel like we're all in the same boat. And some of his tips were, yes, try and figure out, a guided way to sort of relax, unplug from the news when you have to, sort of giving you these tools just to, to deal with this. And one thing he did say was try and find a way to be useful or productive, whether it's cleaning out your kitchen or it's, in his case, creating a short course for people to use. And in my case, doing an interview with him. And I found that really quickly helped me modulate my reactions. And again, what's really humbling is actually the people who are dealing with very serious, sort of disorders. So I do want to make a point about the language we use, because yes, we are dealing with fear, uncertainty. I was very anxious, but somebody who had a full-blown anxiety disorder sent me a couple of messages for the psychologist when we did that chat to say, I just don't know how to deal right now. I can't talk to my therapist. I can't get my medication. I need more specific, tailored advice, and actually got it on that live call. Which is of course very gratifying because you feel you can be useful in that way and connect people who need to be connected. But it is something to think about. I mean, I feel like there are people who are dealing with such serious disorders who right now are just, someone messaged me to say she knows she's going to crash. She has borderline personality, but she's just been going out of her way, trying to rally people to give resources to daily wage laborers, to migrants. I think we can all find that one thing that we can do. But this episode really kind of brought back to me that, that whole cliche of putting your own oxygen mask on first, like it really came home to me this time. And I thought it was a little ironic that I didn't think of the tools that I had sort of put together, but it was quite humbling, as Neha said.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Before I get into some of the questions across all of you, Ajit, I wanted to ask you a question. You shared your story about the storm on Everest. How much of that has influenced the last month or so? Because you are in the travel industry, you're in adventure travel, and that industry has been effectively, gone down to zero in very, very quickly.
Absolutely, James. I think the last 1 month has been almost traumatic for us. We were looking at our best year, perhaps, till we started almost 30 years ago. But then suddenly it's gone downhill from, down to zero. And I have a wonderful team who are like family. Adventure brings you very, very close. And but I think a lot of the same principles do apply. There is a French term called sang-froid, which is an ability to stay calm when all hell is breaking loose. And I think some of that definitely helps. I do know, and again, in a world of adventure, it's your team becomes absolutely critical for you, and it's whatever happens together. I mean, I'm not going to let anything happen to my team, and I know that they are with me, backing me up on this as well. Yeah, so it's been tough, but I think the same rules apply. You've got to stay calm. You've got to look after your team, and the same resilience, tenacity, fortitude, positive energy, all of that which you gain from extreme adventure, all of that comes in handy during this stage.
So question for all three of you. One of the common themes I heard in all of your stories was action, doing things, but it came at different times. Amrita, you talked about a journey you had, and then your brother giving you the call to say, get out there and do something. Ajit, your story on the mountain, and even now about facing that storm and then saying, okay, wait, we need to, calling on your experience to go out there and take the next step, and your training to take the next step and do it. Neha, you basically started by acting, like right away, right? And then you took a pause, you went the other way. So I want to talk about this time of pause and time of action and how it affects your mental energy. That is, does action distract you? Is that what's happening? Or is it actually giving you the strength to deal with everything that's happening around you? How do you balance these? And are the pauses difficult and dangerous or necessary?
So I think the pauses are completely unavoidable, and must happen. The timing may vary for different people, but without owning it and internalizing it, it's very difficult to continue projecting it. And so I think for me, because it started in an action mode, because that's my typical go-to, when there's a problem, I rise to it and I focus on other people, right? And maybe a lot of people who have been through series of traumas where they've had to be providing or taking care, maybe when they weren't prepared. I mean, in my case, certainly I wasn't ready at 5 or at 10 or even today for what I'm dealing with. But when you're forced to lead without being prepared, that tends to become your go-to. And so that was my case. And therefore the pause came almost as an afterthought, or when I had to, or as a reflection. But I feel like without that, you can't last. So unfortunately, the good news and the bad news is we've got to pause, we've got to cry, we've got to own it, and then go from there, wherever that might be and at whatever pace.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree as well. I think that especially the way our lives are, like nowadays, we're so much more used to the busy, that when you sometimes don't have structured time or you haven't given yourself like ridiculous, ambitious targets, you don't know what to do with yourself, And I think one thing we're seeing, where all of us, I think, are working from home, adjusting to this new normal, which we know is not going to go back to the old way anyway soon. I think you will find that there are thoughts that come up as you pause, and these thoughts can be uncomfortable. And so you try to just, get to the next action item very quickly. But a friend of mine who's a therapist, and, it's one of the nice things about working on the mental health side is you have a lot of nice friends who are therapists who can give you free advice. They said it is important to, sit with your feelings, just let your thoughts come and go. I mean, I think you can control how you react afterwards. But for me, what was interesting was she also said kind of after the fact that it's important to be yourself as an individual, sit with those feelings, and then move to the collective, right? So if you have this strong social conscience, or you really want to be taking action at a time like this, which is a crisis, if you're not taking that pause for yourself, I mean, you will burn out and I think face the consequences of that. So I feel like both go hand in hand, like Neha said, but if you can figure out a way to work in the pause before it just happens to you, the better.
I think action invigorates me, and while the pause, I agree with Neha, it is essential, and I'm enjoying the quantity time with the family. In a way, there's a sense of frustration at not being able to do enough. I mean, I'm out there managing the organization I run, my team, helping a friend with an NGO. They are feeding some underprivileged people here in Gurgaon, helping my wife. She's the president of our residents welfare association where I live. But I just feel I want to be able to do more. And that sometimes does lead to a sense of frustration in a way. Yeah. But I'm hoping that as soon as we bounce back, I'm going to go back to my project, which is Planet Harmony, which is about national integration with the youth. And, I feel that the riots in Delhi, it was a national shame. And something like that is a need of the hour. And I'm going to focus my energy the minute we are out of this storm on getting Planet Harmony going again.
So continuing on this idea of what happens in moments when we pause, yes, we can reflect and gain strength and perspective, and like Neha's terms of you have to own it. But in the moments of crisis like this, and Ajit, I know that you had shared your longer story about that moment in Everest when you faced the storm. There's also moments of panic and fear. So Pankaj and Anuj have asked this question about. How do you deal with that? Is it instinctive to get through the panic side of things to the other side? Is there a conscious act that you do? Do you use it to your advantage? Sometimes fear can be a great advantage and a strength. So how do you deal with these things in those moments? Ajit, you'll have to unmute yourself.
It's a combination, I think, of your instinct and conscious mental preparation. I think the first thing I look at is, I want to quote something that the Dalai Lama said. And to quote His Holiness, he says, "Every day think as you wake up. Today, I'm fortunate to be alive. I have a precious human life. I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to use all my energies to develop myself." So I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that when I look back on our time during the storm on Everest, is that, well, while we have to be disciplined, we are safe, we are at home with our loved ones, and that definitely makes a big difference. And like I mentioned, there is this big feeling to get out there and do something. So I would say it's a combination of the two, definitely.
Thank you. Neha?
Yeah. So I think for me, it's as I was saying, it's important to own it. And so the way I look at it is, it's a function of short term versus long term, and what the crisis at hand is, and how much time, energy, and effort is needed at that moment. So for instance, if you're on the summit and you're trying to climb, and you have to act first, and that's what you need to do, then you go with that. But the way I see it is that when it comes to a long term, scalable, sustainable plan for self, then there is really no option but to allow ourselves to feel that to feel that fear and panic, and really see where it goes. Sometimes there is a fear, and then there's a fear of fear, right? We're scared to feel those feelings because we're worried that we won't know what to do with it if it came, right? And they say that if you dig down below any fear, there's the base feeling is either fear or shame, or the fear of shame. And typically these things are linked to some deeper fears or deeper anxieties that we don't want to go down, because then it seems like we will not know how to conquer that mountain, so let's not even climb it, right? And so if we can just accept that about ourselves, just as human nature, right? And knowing that we're going to avoid the big stuff, and use this time and realize that what we're up against today, we can't phantom, we can't quantify, we don't have a solution metrics, we don't have a timeline. There is no choice but to just say, okay, what is my worst fear and how am I dealing with that? And kind of go through a process of what if, okay, then what, and really allow for it to come. And often we're more scared than we need to be. Often things lift and we're left feeling stronger. And now the elephant in the room is what we can talk about.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I just add to that. I think that what we're facing right now, like everyone keeps saying it's unprecedented. And I don't know that we are all absorbing what that actually means, right? A lot of this uncertainty is why you also can't, I think, just instinctively work your way through this present COVID situation. I think your instincts will stand you in very good stead. And then coming back to the, what I was reading on and learning about anxiety, right? So the anxiety response is your body trying to get you through that because it is very fight or flight. It's meant to be a short-term survival hack, right? It's not meant to take you through for a long, extended, undefinable period of time. And I think that's when the danger sort of arises if we don't address what's going on at every step of that way. And perhaps if right now it was not such a collective crisis, we wouldn't even be talking about this. I think one thing, and Neha will probably attest, this is the first time I'm seeing like people talk about mental health just so openly. And, having people actually who've dealt with, it's actually interesting that people who've had to deal with disorders for a very long time are kind of looking at the rest of us right now and being like, aha, so now you know what it feels like. You have to put your coping strategies in place. You do have to put your oxygen mask first. And 100%, I think that action will get us out of where we are. But if we don't take the time to understand physiologically what's happening to us, and not just us, so many people dialing and are leading teams, right? You're responsible for people, whether it's your family, whether it's your teams whose livelihood sort of depends on you. It's amazing that what you realize when you open up this conversation and say it's okay not to be okay. I'm here, I'm listening. Are you okay? What can I do? The kind of stories you get back, it's quite humbling, but it's also a very tangible way for you to have an impact on someone's life. Apart from, all the amazing things everyone is trying to do. I think this is one.
Yeah. James, can I just add to that?
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say that this feeling of helplessness doesn't necessarily have to mean hopelessness, right? And oftentimes that is the challenge. We're scared to feel helpless because then it feels completely hopeless. And just reflecting on our comfort or discomfort with powerlessness, right? When you can't control stuff, when you can't provide answers, we're leading organizations, we're leading teams, we're often, taking care of our families and providing for many others. And when you don't know, how do you deal with not knowing? It may be helpless, but it doesn't have to be hopeless.
Actually, Neha, let's continue on that. And same question for everybody, but Neha, just pushing on this feeling of helpless, hopeless, and the fact that there's many others depending on us. And there's several questions here from Radhika, Anuj, and others, and Pankaj about the fact that let's talk about our immediate people who are depending on us. Each of you has family around you, children, parents, and spouses, and you've all been the leader in those situations at home as well. And so they are looking for you for, okay, maybe not answers, but at least hopefulness, right? So how do you do this? And how do you take them on this journey? And how vulnerable do you let yourselves be in front of them, recognizing they're looking to you for strength?
Yeah. With my daughter, she's 7. She thinks that this is a great thing that's going on because the planet is reclaiming itself, and it's okay if a few people die, and that's collateral damage. And we're sort of having these conversations. But I think me being vulnerable and talking about some of the fears, some of the concerns is important. So starting with her and across the board, just allowing ourselves that vulnerability is to me, it's the only way, because everything else is not true. Everything else is fake. We don't have the answers. We don't, and our kids know. Forget our teams and forget our kids don't know when they're going to go back to school, right? And when has that ever happened? So we have never dealt with this level of uncertainty in our entire lives, where we don't have a plan. Nobody has a plan. No country has a plan. No institution, organization, person, leader can say for sure this is what's going to happen. And so what do we tell our children, right, when they look at us for those answers? And so I think what I do, and what I do these days every day, is really sort of look at the serenity prayer of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? It is my go-to mantra, because every day I remind myself, grant me the serenity to accept what I cannot change, I cannot control, I don't know. Can I have the courage? Can I have the balls to accept that, right? And that's hard, because a lot of us make our own reality, right? I certainly do. Nobody else tells me how to live my life. I live my life on my own terms, right? And this is hard. And the second is, can we then still say, instead of sort of falling into inaction or hopelessness, can we then still say, what are the things I can control? What am I going to do that is in my control? And am I doing that to the optimum, fullest, in true alignment with myself, right? And the last bit I'm adding, because I sometimes tend to do things, and some people might, that are things that we think we should do, that our positions command, that our role and conditioning has been for, right? It may not resonate with you. We don't need to pretend. We that won't last. So this is also a time where you can almost liberate yourself and say, I'm just going to be who I am and do what I can do, and just let destiny, God, and the world take care of everything else, right? Because really, that's all we can do. And this is a great moment to try and accept that.
Yeah.
I think before this pandemic, people used to say that the world is a VUCA world. There's volatility, there's uncertainty, there's chaos and ambiguity. And of course, the world has turned upside down, and we don't know what's coming. Like Neha very rightly just pointed out, yes, you have to be vulnerable, but I think the three things that really do help with your family as well as your team, for me personally, is you have to be honest. And I think you've got to be compassionate, but at the same time confident as well. They have to know, your family and your friends, and your team, that you have to have the confidence in them, and they have to have the confidence in you, that together we will ride the storm. So it's a mixed bag of emotions, going through this storm.
Thank you. Ananta?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I really love that all of our cohorts are listening in and, sharing some of their thoughts as well. I think that just picking up from what you both said, this is really the moment to be as authentic as you can. I think that what does that mean for each of us, right? I mean, I feel like we're seeing some of the worst of humanity right now as a response to COVID-19, but we're also seeing people doing incredible things. And I think, at one point I was very obsessed with, like, anyone who runs a website, right? Clicks and uniques and hits and impressions and video views. And then I realized that, you're really devaluing the impact you can have on a human life. If one person is affected by the work that you're doing, I mean, this is what I feel, and it might sound very naive, but for example, if we're doing a video chat with a psychologist and 3 people have written in to say that really helped them that day, or it helped them the next week, or they have the tools they need to get through the next week. It's made me rethink how I look at the impact of what we try to do. I think sometimes you can be paralyzed by trying to do the big thing very quickly, and it blinds you to what you can do right now, right here, and one thing we can all do is just remember, I mean, again, coming back to my famous interview that I've been obsessing with, it's not social distancing right now, right? It's physical distancing. And it's never been as important for us to have these social support structures in place. I found one really good sort of nugget of advice. We might be super lucky to have, James, like you mentioned, the people we love around us, or teams depending on us, or, family members. There are lots of people, older people, senior citizens, people who are really worried about their parents who are somewhere else and older and struggling. This might be the time to just pick up the phone and get the to do a video call, right? Like, for example, my mom, she's very plugged in, very savvy, hates video calls. I've started doing them with her. Now she feels like she's here. She's home with me, you know. My grandmother, I mean, I feel like there's, you find the time to make an impact. I mean, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Like, even in one person's life, you're going to feel like we're getting out of this crisis okay, because we're all doing what we can.
Okay, so I'm going to push you, all three of you, on this question a little bit more. Thank you for that. The best way to do this is to give you a quantified answer that you can give me. If you were to scale 0 to 10, how much of your personal fears and panics have you shared with the family members that are closest to you? 10 being, I share everything on my head. Amrita.
I would say 9. I feel like I had to check with everyone before sharing today, just to be like, to my brother, are you comfortable with me saying this? My partner. I probably overshare, actually. So 9.
So my answer is interesting because while I talked a lot about sharing, it's hard for me to share with my 7-year-old or with my mother, who's currently on, sort of recovering and has been through very deep anxiety, because a lot of people, triggered who have existing psychosis and then are triggered by the news that they're watching and all of that. And she's living with me right now. So it's quite hard to manage. In fact, even it's hard to work on mental health and do work calls where I'm talking about psychosis and depression and anxiety with one brother in a rehab and my mom here. So that's hard to share in my immediate environment. But what I would say I have started doing is I've started sharing more with myself. I feel like I have a bit more of a connection and a bit more of a dialogue with myself. I'm sort of writing more. I'm sort of, touching base with my feelings and trying to see where they're coming from. And so I'm enjoying that connection. And that's really what is precious for me in this period.
Thank you.
I'd say about 8. And the reason is, at this moment, I can't really see too much of light at the end of the tunnel as to how we're going to do as an organization. So I just feel that I don't want to pass on a lot of the stress to my loved ones. I'd rather absorb some of it. And one of the things I'm doing personally to deal with that is over-exercising. I mean, I get out for 2 to 3 hours every day of, and that just helps me forget. But yeah, the reason it's 8 is because I don't want to pass on all of the stress which is in my system to my loved ones.
Thank you all so very much. That's just deeply helpful. Neha, very early on, you used a word. I'm going to switch gears a little bit that I wanted to explore with all of you. You used the term grief. It's not a term I had first associated with this crisis until we had talked the other day, and I've heard it several times in my conversations with other fellows around. Can you speak a little bit about why this time is a period of grief for you? And Amrita, Ajit, if you also reflect on that phrase.
It is, right? And I think there's, I want to end with some silver lining around that, which is a new revelation. But it is. I mean, when we don't know how to feel our feelings, when we don't know what to say to people, when we don't know where life is going, when it will go, where it will go, that sense of powerlessness, it triggers you, it can trigger you and make you feel very vulnerable. And there's a sadness to that. It's like the death of a way of living. There's a death of the way of what you're used to. I mean, I want pizza, I don't have pizza. Like, it's, I want to be able to call in for a hot chocolate fudge. It's the death of, I want to be able to see my friends. I want my daughter right now puts a ladder on our end of the boundary wall and then talks to her friend over the wall, and she's perched on that ladder half the day. so that they have distance, but one's in the garden and the other's on the other side. And I want our life back, and I don't know if I will have it, right? And I don't know when. Nobody knows. When I was going through uncertainty and grief as a kid, I used to feel like, well, I don't know, but maybe somebody knows, right? Somebody is going to solve this, right? And you feel safe in that, the prime minister knows, or your father knows, or the head of your business knows. Somebody has the answer, right? But nobody does right now. And the feeling of uncertainty can produce a lot of grief. What is the silver lining in that is that the safety in grieving together gives you strength through that grief. I looked at a friend's face just on FaceTime, as I mentioned, after watching Contagion, and she didn't say anything. I didn't say much, but there was strength in grieving together. And I think that's our best bet right now. And we should bloody well do it, because otherwise, I don't know how we're all going to get through this otherwise.
Thank you.
I'd say, well, definitely there is grief, but again, when I go back to the storm where our lives were at stake, I think we have to stay optimistic. We have to, a lot of human battles are fought. A lot of battles are fought in the human mind. And I think we've just got to stay positive in spite of all the uncertainty around us. And I think we've got to do things, whether it's with the family, so take that time out. Take time. I think another thing that really helps is time away from devices, and that calls for a lot of discipline. I mean, I'm not saying that I can do it all the time, but I'm trying now to look at my phone for half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the afternoon, and another half an hour or an hour sometimes in the evenings. I think time away from devices, a little bit of time on personal introspection, and just doing things that make us happy in this period. I think that's going to definitely help us ride this storm. It definitely helps me get out of that grief.
Yeah, and someone shared this this article with me. I think it was in Harvard Business Review about this. When they first started calling what we're feeling grief, and they said it is many different griefs. For me, I feel like partly when they talk about anticipatory grief, that's what maybe I'm feeling the most of, which is that you actually don't know what's going to happen. Usually, it's fear of death or fear of some major crisis, and yet we're already in the crisis. We just don't know when it's going to end. I think what's very empowering, and one thing to think about is that especially when you're reporting on mental health or you're talking about this, very quickly you'll hear from the experts. The thing that we keep confusing or conflating is mental health and mental illness, right? We all have mental health, and we're the best guardians of that. There are times though when what you're feeling is not just grief, and it's not just manageable in a self-help way, the way that some of us are describing right now. There are times when it's actually impeding your day-to-day life, and you actually need to talk to somebody who knows what's going on. And I think to that extent, actually, this is an important kind of PSA, that help is available. There are helplines, there's contact info. A lot of psychologists and therapists are doing teleconsults right now. Neha's sort of entire app has, resources. We've listed some as well. And for that one reason, I would say that you maybe time away from devices, not so much, because you do want to keep building that community socially, if you're not lucky enough to be staying with people, that you're very close and comfortable to. So yeah, 100% we can tackle this grief together. I think it's very difficult to speak about if you don't have the vocabulary. So that's one thing I hope that this conversation has helped us. It's certainly helped me, but kind of naming what you're going through, that's a very big step in dealing with it.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you. And we've talked about several sets of topics. We've got a few minutes left, and I've got a couple of more questions I want to get into. We've talked about fear and panic. We've talked about anxiety. We've talked about grief. And there was another piece that came out. It came out in something you said, Amrita, when you were speaking early, which is about guilt. because we feel like we've lost a lot, but we look around and we realize, actually, maybe we haven't lost as much as others have. So do you feel that? Is that something that is in the mix here? And if so, how do you take yourself through that? This is a great question that came from Sahana. Thank you, Sahana.
Oh, thanks, Sahana. Yeah, that is, yeah, 100%. I think you can't live in India and not be aware that there are so many different Indias. We're seeing some of it through the news reports. That guilt is partly why, I was just saying earlier that you feel, how can I even be getting so stressed? And I was told, that's not a good framing. You need to be aware that it's possible to be going through your own, storms or crisis or whatever, and hopefully then be able to step back and get some perspective. So I think, again, from the individual to the collective, and it's such a great, looking at the Aspen fellows and the cohort, I've always felt, again, a little naively, but I've always felt that if everyone, and Sahana certainly does this, if everyone had that one thing they really cared about and worked towards that one thing, we would be in a much better place. What the crisis has forced us to do is, there's a concept called gaze aversion, which one of the psychiatrists was telling me about, that we all do. When you're at a red light and they're beggar kids and you're like, oh my God, I just don't want to deal with it. You don't make eye contact. You try to pretend it's not happening because that's how you sleep at night. I think what this crisis and the reporting and seeing what's actually happening is making us do is skip over that step. And again, I think we've seen the worst of human behavior in terms of how some, parties, groups, and so on have reacted. But we've also seen amazing resilience, hope, action from people who sometimes don't have all that much, but they're kind of banding together to help those who are worse off. So that to me would be one way to alleviate the guilt of privilege in India today.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. I want to try and stir it up a bit and maybe take a slightly contrarian view. I think there's a real problem with this feeling of guilt. Because we're very quick to feel it, right? Especially those of us in positions of privilege and access, and we straight away feel guilty, and we straight away want to jump into action, therefore, and straight away want to solve the world. That's that happens to me a lot, and I feel like in that process, I end up sort of maybe being more externally stimulated than internally driven. I kind of end up just reacting and trying to roll out and see through this purpose that I need to now fulfill because of the role that I'm playing or that I need to be playing, or somebody else thinks I need to be playing, or my position or my family or whatever needs me to play. And I feel like the opportunity here is to turn that around and look at it, come from a place of gratitude. And so really just focus on saying, for all the guilt I'm feeling, right? If I just say, I have so much to be grateful for, and what can I do to further amplify and create layers and layers, like ripples of gratitude, right? Every day I want to feel grateful. So what am I going to do to feel grateful every day? How am I going to add purpose and meaning to my life every day? Just by creating that feeling of gratitude inside of me. So I feel like the day I sang on Sunday, what got me out was sort of a gratitude list. And I've decided to do that every day. We try and do it at the dinner table. We try and write little post-its and stick them in a box. And really, there is a lot of power in what we're feeling. There's a lot of power in positive emotions, a lot of power in gratitude. So I want us to be able to use that as our strength. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you.
I don't know if you saw images of people, migrant laborers trying to get home. They were given rotten bananas to eat this morning near the Yamuna River in Delhi. So, well, definitely when you see images of people trapped in the indignity of acute deprivation, I think you do feel guilty given our lifestyle. We're all lucky. We have more than 3 square meals a day. And well, it makes me want to get out there and do something about it. I feel this is a test for me, both as a human being and as a team leader. And I want to do whatever I can personally and get strength from giving back. I mean, it's in a way, it takes me back to Mount Everest. You know, this feeling of guilt, knowing that you have so much going for yourself in your life, makes me want to give back even more and to set the right example, both as a human being and as a leader.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you. I want to thank you all for just an amazing conversation. I do have a couple of questions to bring to the end. One is from Meka. Meka asked this question very early on. Meka, I've been saving it for this. What are 3 tips you would give, you would advise us to do in how you are dealing with this crisis, this moment, and 3 tips that help you draw strength?
I think the one thing that I would say is just while we're on this guilt is that guilt can be a dangerous thing going forward. So I would say that one of my tips is that, you know, let's drop the survivor syndrome. Let's stop feeling guilty for the things that we cannot control and we cannot directly action and implement on that day, because that's what the Serenity Prayer says. And let's just do the absolute best that we can do for the things we can control. So that's my one. My 2 would really be to not lose this opportunity to connect with ourselves. It's a very rare moment where it's a gift to be able to have some degree of self-compassion, self-care, self-acceptance, and really dictate what the rest of our life can be and the choices that we make. So I would say not lose that opportunity and spend time nurturing that. And the third would be to connect and you know, have gratitude and especially for Aspen. I mean, right now, you guys and this forum is the anchor of my life. So thank you.
Well, I would say stay positive, just stay absolutely optimistic, stay disciplined, and by that I mean self-discipline. And I would also say that use this time as a blessing to reinvent, to reinvigorate yourself as a human being.
Thanks, Ajit.
I think I would say, I mean, in addition to all those great points, just be aware of how much news you want to consume on any given day. It can be very, very stressful just to follow, like, you know, the breaking news cycle. So if you just put a little conscious thought of how much you're absorbing, how much do you really need to know? Some of us are just checking our phones immediately when we wake up in the morning, right before we go to bed, and there's that whole arc in between. So if it's not, you know, mandated by work, maybe you don't need to be on the, you know, the breaking news cycle. A lot of people have said that it's helpful to get a sort of routine going, you know, and I think that routine can be as strict, disciplined, or as free-flowing as you want it to be, depending on obviously your own daily schedule. So obviously my routine on weekends, I find I'm definitely a little bit more, I go easier on myself than on work days, but I still want to get some sort of creative work done. So that kind of creative outlet does help. And then finally, I think the other tip really is to remember that it is not like, it doesn't have to mean social isolation. I mean, I think we can't emphasize that enough. You know, as much as you can connect with people, I've heard of people like reaching out to friends after like 40 years, you know, people you went to school with or whatever. And you have the tools to do that now, right? So even if you don't want to speak to anyone immediately around you, it's sometimes you don't, and you want to vent with someone who's not going to be, you know, there the next day or whatever. Yeah, stay as connected as you can, because I think these are the support structures that are going to get us through this.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, last question, easy one, but it's kind of a forward-looking one. And Anuj, thank you for asking this. Looking ahead, there's going to be a time when all this is behind us. Yeah? What are you going to do? One thing you're going to do: acquire, undo, reach, something.
Wow, I was not ready for that question. Clearly not thinking this is going to end anytime soon. I don't know. I guess get pizza, get hot chocolate fudge, do all of that, you know, meet friends, drink face to face for a change instead of being this lone, you know, bedroom drinkers with all you folks in Zoom. I I really don't know. I really don't know. That's my truth.
Thank you.
I don't know today.
It's a tough one, but I would say the one thing that this storm has made me realize is that I want to spend even more time with my loved ones, with my quantity time, with my family, and with my buddies, people who mean a lot to me in my little life.
Thank you.
I think I have just been feeling like the pain of all of the plans I flaked on socially and why I go out for drinks or coffee with X friend on Y day. I can't wait to get out again and just meet people I care about. Yeah.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you. So I want to thank all three of you. I just have loved the honesty with which you've taken us through this journey. Just naming all of the emotions that we've all felt. And I think some of you mentioned that naming it itself is so valuable. The anxieties, the panic, the guilt, the grief, we felt it all, and it's taken us, and it's all come in such a short time. It's really shaken us all up. But just the authenticity with which the three of you have shared your stories has really helped us feel anchored, feel like we're not alone. So I've appreciated that. And I think I've been looking at, what is this thing that and over this week that I've been talking with the three of you, there's a reading that came to me about what I've gained from this week with you. And then of course today, and I'm going to share that with you. But first, before I do that, I did want to offer everybody this, that both Amrita and Neha have got these amazing ventures going. So if anybody wants to reach out at any time, please do. The healthcollective.in has a great space for conversations and information. And Inner Hour is an app. You can get it on either platform. And it's got assessments, self-help. A lot of the stuff is available ready on. So please do tap these amazing resources that have been built. But I did want to share with you what got me about the three of you. And it's about being real people, that your journey, your history, your past, and the way it's informed the way you are dealing with things today has made you all very, very solid. And so this is a reading from a children's book called The Velveteen Rabbit. And I'll read it out. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side near the nursery. "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a long, long time. Not just to play with, but really loves you. Then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" the rabbit asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily or have sharp edges or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly except to people who don't understand. And once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts always. So I want to thank you all for being very real and joining us today.
That's a beautiful reading. Thank you, James. And thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much,
James.
Thanks to all of you for joining.
Thank you.
We'll
Thank you.
next week.
Thank you.
Bye, Amrita. See you, Neha. Bye. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.